Hi, and welcome to this live reading from Juliet's Journey to Love, Great Smoky Mountain Getaways, Book 1 by Elsie Davis, and this is presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Chapter 1. Juliet shivered in the dark of night, pulling the sleeping bag up tighter around her neck. Unfortunately, the chill of a cold August evening wasn't her nemesis. Her stomach clenching again, another wave of nausea coming over her unexpectedly. She hoped it was simply a case of last night's dinner not agreeing with her. The only problem with that theory was that yesterday she'd not felt well all day. She hadn't said anything to Laura and Blair, not wanting to alarm them unnecessarily. The Freedom and Faith small group were 5 women who met at the First Congregational Church in Memphis, but not everyone had been able to make this trip. The group had systematically divided the Appalachian Trail into sections with 3 goals in mind. Use the time and nature to grow closer to God, become more independent and strong-willed in life, and, of course, complete the trail. As the leader of the group, Juliet couldn't afford to get sick, but, working as an advanced licensed nurse practitioner in the hospital, she was exposed to a lot of germs. And sometimes due diligence with washing hands and clothes and being extremely careful just wasn't enough. Juliet was beginning to think this was one of those times, and the timing couldn't have been worse. They'd chosen this section of the trail in the Great Smoky Mountains since it was the closest to home and a great way to get a feel for what to expect going forward. They were 2 days into the hike, having started at Fontana Dam, and 4 days away from the scheduled pickup location at Newfound Gap. They'd planned the trip to include some time to enjoy the beauty of the mountains, including a day of rest along the way. Basically, they were in the middle of nowhere. Juliet hugged herself and rocked, trying to keep warm. She tried to relax and fall back asleep, hoping whatever was bothering her system would be gone by morning. Judging by her watch, that only gave her an hour or so to recover. Minutes passed, the oppressive heat inside the sleeping bag becoming unbearable. She rolled over once again, this time unzipping the bag and flinging back the downy comfort. Tiny pinpricks of heat peppered the back of her neck, down her arms, and across her chest. Sweat broke out across her forehead. Using the palm of her hand, she wiped it away. She was burning up, but the cold of the night clung to the sweat and chilled her. It was as though hot and cold were at war within her body, and regulating the temperature was a losing battle. 30 minutes of tossing and turning didn't help one iota. Instead of feeling better, she felt worse. The pains in her stomach intensified as she clutched her midsection. Laura got up, disappeared a few minutes, and then returned. Her friend was big on rising early in order to get a start on the fire and breakfast. Juliet remained quiet, not wanting the others to start asking questions. Somehow she needed to pull it together enough for them to get back on the trail and cover the 7 miles intended for today's part of the trail. It wasn't long before Blair was up and joining Laura by the fire pit. Laura glanced her way, and Juliet scrunched her eyes shut as she tried to delay the inevitable. The sound of footsteps alerted her that it was a losing battle. "Time to get up, sleepyhead," Laura said, tapping her foot against the bottom of the sleeping bag. "I've got coffee." Coffee sounded good, and it might just do the trick to settle her stomach. "Thanks, this might be just what I need," Juliet said, trying to sound upbeat as she opened her eyes, sat up, and reached for the coffee. "Don't tell me you're worn out already," Laura grinned. "We've still got 4 days and 19 miles to cover." "I'll be fine, just sleepy. Nothing a little caffeine won't cure." Juliet pasted on a smile, even though the effort cost her. "Are you sure you're feeling okay?" Laura's grin slipped into a frown as she stepped closer. "Your color is a little off." "It's nothing, I promise. Blair's cooking might have done me in," Juliet teased. "Hey, that's not even funny. Those are MREs. Nobody can screw up ready-to-eat meals," Blair said defensively, joining in the conversation. "Speaking of eating, our hydrated powdered scrambled eggs and ham are almost finished heating up. We've got 30 minutes before we hit the trail if we're going to stay on schedule. I, for one, will be excited to reach our next registered stopping point. More specifically, the extra day we have planned to enjoy the scenic spot. It'll be great if there are others staying at the lean-to, and we can trade hiking stories." Laura laughed, moving back to the fireplace and warming her hands. "Just give me a minute and I'll join you." With her friends occupied by the fire and taking up breakfast, Juliet set her coffee down on the cold, hard floor, braving the chilly morning air as she crawled out of her sleeping bag. With one arm still wrapped around her belly, she used the other hand to wipe away the fresh beads of sweat on her forehead. Another wave of nausea hit her. Juliet reached for the post at the end of the bed that was normally used for hanging bags off the ground and away from night critters, but in this case she used it to keep herself from falling. She shot a quick glance at the others to make sure no one saw or suspected anything and waited for the dizziness to subside. Juliet grabbed her backpack and pulled out a fresh set of undergarments in one of the long-sleeve shirts she'd bought specifically for the hike. She'd changed behind the screen they'd hung for privacy, but the actions proved too much in her weakened state. A fresh wave of nausea hit her, only this time it felt different. It was more than a rolling stomach. As she picked up the bag and righted herself, dizziness overcame her. She grabbed the wall for support. "Everything okay?" Blair said, coming into the lean-to. "It's not like you to take a long time to get dressed when it's this cold. Don't tell me you're afraid of my cooking this morning," she teased. I'm okay. I'm just not feeling myself. I'll be okay in a few minutes," Juliet said, struggling to get the words out, the effort costing her. A fresh wave of pain rocketed across her belly. Pasting a hand over her mouth, she ran past Blair and Laura and into the woods, searching for some sort of privacy. She leaned back against a tree, doubled over. But nothing she did could stop the contents of her stomach from erupting and spilling onto the ground in front of her. Juliet shook, chills racking her body. Her head pounded in a relentless thumping rhythm. "Judging by the looks of last night's dinner on the ground, I'd say you're not okay. You look awful," Blair said dryly, taking her by the arm. "Come on, we need to get you back to your cot and figure out what's going on." She reached out to touch Juliet's forehead. "You're burning up with fever. Why didn't you say anything?" "I was hoping it was nothing," Juliet chattered, grateful for Blair's support. "Laura, come quick and help me. Juliet's really sick," Blair called out. Laura came running, helping to support Juliet on the other side. "Let's get her back to bed." "That's what I was thinking." Her friends led her to the lean-to and helped Juliet down onto the cot, covering her with a sleeping bag. "What's wrong?" Laura asked. "I don't know," Juliet groaned. "I've been feeling off since yesterday. I hoped it would pass, but instead it's worse. I'm sorry." "Stop, there's nothing to be sorry about. I'm sure you didn't want to get sick. What do you think is going on?" Blair felt her forehead again. Juliet fought back another wave of nausea, her body shaking uncontrollably. "It could be anything. Bad food?" She tried to shoot Blair a grin and failed. "Possibly a stomach bug or the flu. There's a lot of that at the hospital I could have picked up." "What can we do?" Laura asked. "Maybe some water would help, or a cold compress on my head. I don't know." It's not like they had very many options. "I'm sorry. As soon as I shake this, we'll leave, I promise." "Stop apologizing. By the looks of you, we're not going anywhere, and I'm not taking any chances. Your fever is way too high, something I can tell even without a thermometer. Blair, stay here and keep a close eye on her. I'm going to take the satellite phone and search out the nearest ridge to try to reach emergency services." "Sounds good. Just hurry," Blair said, nodding in agreement. "Laura, wait. We have a schedule to keep, and we can't stop now. I don't want to ruin this for everybody," Juliet said, her teeth chattering in the process. "Judging by your condition, you're not in a position to stop me. It's for your own good," Laura said before turning to leave. Juliet watched as her friend crossed the creek bridge over the stream and then disappeared down the trail. Another epic fail. From failed relationships to failed leadership responsibilities, it didn't seem anything was going to go right in her life. She wanted marriage and a family, but at the age of 30, she was finally coming to accept that it wasn't God's plan for her life. Her last relationship, like the two before it, were failures. Most of the people she knew were married with children or happily close to it, but Juliet simply picked the wrong guys. When she came to the realization that God's calling might not be for her to have marital bliss, instead to lead and help others, she'd accepted the leadership role of the small group. The church would be her family. The opportunity had presented itself right after her last breakup, the timing perfect. Now she wasn't so sure she'd gotten the message right, because this was just one more thing to add to the failure column of her life. Well, all except for one thing, having smart friends. Juliet knew Laura's decision was the right one, because although she hated to admit it, she was extremely sick. Juliet rolled over and groaned. 20 minutes passed, and there was no sign of help. Laura paced the area impatiently while Blair busied herself with cleaning up the breakfast dishes. Both friends took turns checking on her, applying a cool compress to her head and trying to get her to drink water. A sound in the distance caught her attention about the same time as the others heard it. The rumblings of a four-wheeler would be her guess. But what if it wasn't who they were expecting? Sick or not, it was her job to keep the others safe. Reaching for her backpack, Juliet pulled out the small pistol she'd hidden in its depths. She pushed herself upright using the edge of the cot. Standing took great effort, but once up, she walked slowly, crossing the short distance to join Laura and Blair, hoping to get a better look. "What are you doing? Are you crazy?" Laura asked, glancing down at the gun. Juliet clutched her stomach with one hand and the gun in the other. No, just safe." "Oh, for Pete's sake, who else would be out here when we need them most?" Laura huffed. "Laura has a point." Blair said, shrugging and turning her attention back to the new arrival. The man driving the ATV skidded to a stop and hopped off the machine. He obviously knew his way around as he started walking the short distance toward the bridge, the only easy place to cross. The three of them waited, Laura falling silent. The man entered the clearing just as Juliet raised the gun, her hand shaking with the effort. He looked up as he stepped off the bridge, shock written all over his face. Clearly, he wasn't expecting a welcoming committee of four, her gun being the steadfast extra. Who are you? Juliet asked, her voice as shaky as her hand. The man looked more like a bearded hermit than someone here to help. She clutched the gun tighter. Someone called in an emergency, and I'm the closest thing you've got to help, Annie Oakley. I suggest you put that thing down before I turn and walk away. Or, judging by your color, you pass out. The man's attitude rankled. Juliet considered her effort smart and safe, but didn't give a hill of beans what he said. Except if he was for real, she couldn't risk having him follow through with his threat. She desperately needed help. How do we know you're telling the truth? It pays to be careful nowadays, Laura asked, apparently not much liking the look of the guy either. Juliet clutched her stomach tighter, fighting back the swimming sea of trees speeding by. I'm Jake Kensington. Sheriff Alan Harper sent me to help, the man said, his tone vibrating with impatience. Sheriff Harper. Laura glanced over at her and Blair. He's the one I talked to on the sat phone. Blair glanced back and forth between the medical bag in the man's hand and Juliet. This is Juliet, she said, pointing in her direction. Blair was clearly convinced he was legit. It was all too much. Lowering the gun, Juliet put her one hand to her head, but didn't stop the spinning, and she felt herself falling. The sound of voices calling Juliet back from the blackness. She shook her head, trying to escape the awful odor she recognized. Smelling salts. But why? The fog in her head cleared a tiny bit as she tried to focus. Is she okay? Blair asked, concern in her voice. We told her to stay in bed, but she's hard-headed. Please help her. Blair's gift was one of sympathy and nurturing, and her friend's presence was calming. Her pulse is weak, but okay, the man said. The name Jake came to mind, but she didn't know any Jakes. Juliet tried to pull away. It's okay. I'm here to help. I'm going to carry you to your cot and check you over. Do you understand? The man asked, trying to calm her fears. It's not like she had a choice but to trust him in her condition. He's the guy they sent to help Juliet, Laura reassured her. Juliet glanced back at him and nodded. Jake picked her up and headed for the lean-to. Can one of you grab my bag? He asked, clearly expecting his request to be followed as he walked away. He laid her down on the bed and felt her forehead. You're burning up. Tell me something I don't know, mister. The prickly sweat of her skin was driving her nuts. And judging by the hair plastered to your neck and forehead, you've been running a high fever for a while. First thing first, we need to get your fever down. He picked up something from the floor and frowned. Can someone get me a fresh, cool compress, stat? Blair moved off to get what he needed. Jake looked up at Laura. Which one of you called this in? I did, Laura answered, moving closer. Sheriff said you mentioned vomiting. Any more bouts of it since you called for help? Twice. We've tried to get her to drink water, but she's not had more than a few sips, Laura added, bringing him up to date. At first guess, I think it might be a gastrointestinal virus. The fever, sweats, vomiting, and ashen color all fit. The problem is, it can't be positive as there are other possibilities, and I'm not sure she can keep a tablet down based on what you're telling me. He reached for the cup of water and put a hand behind her back and lifted her forward. Try to drink some of this. We've got to get you hydrated. Juliet noted the compassion in his voice, and it drew forth an unexplained level of trust. Jake wanted to help her, and he cared. She tried, but the effort cost her. A couple of sips is a start, but not enough. Thank you, Juliet said, her voice soft and weak, barely recognizable to herself. Does your stomach hurt? He asked, lowering her back onto the cot with great gentleness for a giant. She nodded. He turned to Laura. When was the last time she vomited? About 10 minutes ago. Anyone notice a dark coloring other than what she might have eaten for dinner last night? He asked. No, not that I know of, but then I wasn't exactly examining it. Blair scrunched up her face in distaste as she handed him the cold compress. No blood, Juliet said, forcing the words from her lips, his question comforting. Dark coloring would be indicative of bleeding and, considering the current situation, life-threatening. Only someone with medical training or a prior experience with the condition would zero in on the importance of the information. Jake nodded, satisfied with her answer. Is she going to be okay? Blair asked, both her friends hovering close and watching every move Jake made. She'll be fine if I have anything to say about it, he said, his voice filled with a confidence Juliet wasn't feeling. He reached in his bag and pulled out a needle. He prepped it before inserting it into an individual dose bottle like those used in the hospital. It wasn't something someone typically had lying around the house. This is an antibiotic. It's the quickest way to get something into your body to start fighting back. It's critical we get the first dose in right away, okay? He asked, watching her closely. Juliet nodded. Everything he said made sense to her. What's that? Laura asked when he pulled out another vial and combined the contents with the first one. It's anti-nausea medicine. I'm not sure she can hold anything down taken orally, Jake said, trying to put them at ease. Trusting a stranger didn't come easy, but it's not like they had a choice. Juliet's eyes grew large as he rolled up her shirt sleeve. Just a little prick, and then hopefully you'll start to feel better. We need to get you to drink some more water. Think you can handle that? He asked gently, brushing her hair back off her face. Juliet nodded. Good girl. Jake stuck the needle in her arm and injected fluid slowly. When he finished, he turned to look at her friends. The sheriff mentioned you all have 3 more days listed on the plan you registered for this hike. There's no reason you two can't continue, but Juliet's not going anywhere. I'll have to take her back to my cabin and continue to monitor her health. I'm hoping within the next 24 hours that we'll see the fever break and be on the right side of this nastiness. We're not leaving her. If she's going anywhere, we're going with her, Laura spoke up, not happy with Jake's plan of action. But what about meeting up with our pickup group at the other end? Blair asked, frowning. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Let's just hope she gets better quickly, and then maybe we can make double time and still make it to the pickup location on schedule. We'll figure something out. All I know is that we're not leaving her alone with a strange man in the middle of nowhere. Laura was in a take-charge mode, something Juliet was grateful for, even if it was supposed to have been her job. Ladies, I'm taking your friend with me, and I'm leaving in 5 minutes, with you or without you. I don't care which. So if you're coming along, I suggest you pack up, now. It would seem Mr. Gentle had a domineering side when it came to getting his way. He stood, closing his medical bag, and looked down at her. I've got to get you back across the creek while your friends pack up. The sheriff mentioned you had medical training, not that you were a bear. Chill out, Grizzly Adams, Laura said, rolling her eyes at him. Name's Jake. Grizzly Jake if you insist, and I don't give a bear's behind what you think about me. But now, you're down to 4 minutes. He lifted Juliet into his arms, cradling her against his chest. His solid chest gave her a sense of security as she inhaled the woodsy scent on his neck. It wasn't a heavy scent, one more like soap instead of cologne. Fitting, considering it didn't appear the man had seen the sharp edge of a razor in years. Well, let's just hope, Grizzly Jake, your medical training is more than a 2-hour first aid course, Laura teased. She did, however, start tossing all their things together to comply. I reckon my training will do in a pinch. 3 minutes, he called out, and started across the bridge. Juliet's arms slipped around his neck as she held on. Don't mind them, they're just protective. I'm not worried about them. My responsibility is toward you. Minutes later, her friends had loaded their belongings into the back of the ATV. Since we're going to be staying with you, I figure you should get to know us all on a first-name basis. I'm Blair, and this is Laura, she said, pointing at Laura, and you already know Juliet. Jake nodded. Great. Now that we've established first names, you need to understand something. My concern is for the patient. You two are on your own. He settled Juliet across the front seat, propping her upper body across his lap and holding her up with one hand. She felt protected. Exactly where are we supposed to ride? Laura asked, frowning when she realized the ATV was only a 2-seater. I hadn't planned on a group rescue. You can each stand on one side and hang on to the upper bar to keep from falling off. It's the best I can do unless you want to walk. Her friends took his words at face value and stepped up, hanging on for dear life as he put the ATV in gear and shot forward.